Great. Good morning to everybody. Nice to see you. I'm glad we had a chance to convene such a fantastic panel this morning. It's an outlook and update on the Belt and Road Initiative. And as emerging markets editor for CNN Business, I spent probably a third of my time being based in the UAE, looking east, and particularly to the new relationships that have been formed over the last decade, but particularly accelerated over the last 5 years, and that is the relationship between this region and China, this region and India, and this region going on the spice route down to Southeast Asia as well, and the connectivity using the UAE and particularly Dubai between China and reaching down into Africa as well. The Belt and Road Initiative has actually gathered a great deal of momentum since I based myself out of Beijing for 7 weeks at the start of 2017. CNN had placed me there in the first 100 days of the current president, President Trump, to see how the relationships between China and the U.S. would be evolving. And one of the key issues that I covered when I was in Beijing for that period of time was the establishment of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB in Beijing. And the narrative from Washington was that the AIIB had aspirations to replace the World Bank. And as time has gone forward, that discussion has faded away. But there is a political concern about the motivations of the Belt and Road Initiative, not just being a development initiative, but one where it exercises the power over China over a longer period of time. And it's kind of the giant elephant in the room, but one this panel is more than willing to address, which I think is excellent. One would have to be blind being based in the UAE, not seeing the depth of the relationship between the Arab world now and China. It's been very strategic over the last 10 years, as I was noting. But there's an understanding between the two that business can be done east to east. The tendency in the Arab world, particularly in the Gulf states with their oil sovereign funds, was to look to Europe and look to the United States initially. And I think what has changed in the last 5 years in particular is a willingness to invest in China and to invest in India and have this relationship going back and forth, driven in part by energy, but energy being the forging initiative and building the trade relationships and security relationships beyond that. The ambassador is going to speak in Arabic today, showing the initiative of the Silk Road. He's an Arabic speaker for 40 years, which is very impressive. His English is fluent, and he said his Arabic's even better. So even though I live in the region, I don't speak in Arabic, he feels extremely confident that his Arabic is better than the Queen's English, right? So we'll leave that to you.
Thank you. Because
great. Go ahead. So you can get your headset ready. Please, go ahead. What you say?
Yeah, thank you. Because my English is still limited, but more than that, I prefer to speak in Arabic to respect our owners.
Good. The Deputy Minister of Pakistan, it's good to see you. I just came back from Pakistan for the leaders in Islamabad and mentioned this again. It was a very important topic, the relationship on the China-Pakistan economic corridor, what it means for them in terms of development today, the concerns locally about potential debt, and the issue that you'll be addressing on that and the opportunity that it holds going forward. Ryan's a specialist in Asia and a specialist into China, so willing to jump in on many of the debates. And we have a think tank from China as well. It's great to see you speaking fluently in English. These gooseneck mics are extremely directional, so you have to keep it almost in front of your mouth when we have the conversation. So it's very directional. I'm the only one with the tie mic on. And I want to definitely allow at least 15 minutes for questions. So please take your notes. I would ask you to be very direct because we only have an entire hour together. Ambassador was going to go with an opening statement, and in the back discussion that we had in the green room here, he's going to parse that to 90 seconds, but I promised him I would address all the issues that you brought up. First and foremost, let's start with the building blocks here for this audience. It's a very educated audience, obviously, but this is being streamed out as well. What is the primary goal of the Belt and Road Initiative, which you suggest, Ambassador? What is the primary motivation here as we go forward in terms of the number of signatory countries and then allaying the fears of what the real motivation is here of Beijing? Thank you.
فعلا أعتقد من المهم جدا بقراءة صحيحة.
It is very very important to properly read the Belt and Road Initiative, which is known by the acronym BRI. This initiative is an economic initiative. It urges economic development. The initiative covers 5 axes. First, the exchange of policies, the strengthening of the infrastructure, reinforcing trade, and the trade at the level of the financial in the financial sector, that is the exchange of financial investments. These 5 axes do embody this cooperation through the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. BRI has been welcomed by various countries. We do believe that this is very significant. Second of all, when it comes to the World Economic Forum, which looks into new cooperative tools and procedures, really reflects the spirit of the BRI. The spirit of the BRI is based on tolerance, openness, peace, exchange of experience, cooperation, and all the good behaviors. Through the BRI, we have been able to have big achievements. For example, we have 17 Arab countries. 17 Arab countries have signed cooperative agreements with China to move forward with this initiative. We have 124 countries globally, and more than 200 international organizations have signed these cooperative documents with China when it comes to the BRI. By the end of this month, we will hold the second session of the global cooperation for the BRI in Beijing. And till now, we have more than 40 prime ministers and presidents. More than 100 countries will be represented in that forum. This is briefly the main points of the BRI.
If I may, with you, and thank you for being so direct with that. Is it very important for the BRI summit that's taking place now? And I spoke to His Excellency Khalid Al-Faleh of Saudi Arabia yesterday, and he's making it a point to go, even though they have a big finance summit taking place in Saudi Arabia at the same time, to articulate a different, broader message to allay the fears that we see in the West that the dominance of the BRI is not justified. Is it important for Xi Jinping to make this statement as president today to kind of nullify these concerns?
As I have mentioned, the spirit of the BRI is to have more cooperation, more collaboration, and more exchange of experience. This is based on our philosophy in China. We believe that the world in the future has to live in peace, to guarantee prosperity for all, tolerance, openness, peace, and welfare. This is what China seeks. It's our endeavor. Therefore, any country, if it is willing to participate in the BRI forum, they are the most welcome. We do believe that they will be taking part in this constructive approach. We will have bilateral agreements with the countries in different regions aiming at benefiting from the BRI through collaboration and cooperation. We will be having a state of win-win for all.
For the issue of a counterbalance on the argument, we go to Ryan next and then come to the Deputy Minister. Because of this BRI summit that's taking place in China in 3 weeks' time, you'd notice the narrative in Europe. We had Xi Jinping come and visit Italy. My wife happens to be Italian, so I was particularly covering the movements quite carefully, both in Trieste and Genoa, and the plans in southern Italy as well. Italy was welcoming to sign on to the BRI, but the narrative out of whether it was Berlin or out of Paris or out of Brussels was very different. So what has shifted on this concern that's being raised in Europe about China, would you suggest, Ryan?
Well, John, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I think that part of the anxiety about BRI stems from a few different roots. And I appreciated the ambassador's comments, but since we're here, we should be frank with each other. The first concern is the strategic nature of the enterprise. In other words, there are many projects that have a commercial undertone to them, but not all. There are strategic, non-commercial efforts underway through the BRI initiative that are causing concerns in the strategic community, not just in the United States, but also through parts of Europe. And I'll offer a few examples. For example, ports. Ports are the primary vector through which people express their concern. China is investing in ports next to functioning ports that have excess capacity, which raises questions: why would China pour so much money into ports if there are already capacity in those ports?
Can I stop you just for a second? Because I'm very concerned. Which ports are you referring to?
Well, I'll offer the example of Gwadar, which is right next to Karachi. I'll offer the example of Hambantota, which is right next to Colombo. There's the port in Djibouti that there's a gap between the way that China described it and the way that it is being used. And so you add all of these up and you develop this pattern recognition that there may be more than just win-win cooperation and economic benefit involved in the BRI initiative. The second concern that many people have is debt sustainability. And it's not just me. The managing director of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, has warned that incautious loans could lead to balance of payments problems around the world. So that's a real area for concern. And then the third, I would just sort of basket as a values proposition. There have been instances where BRI projects have led to corruption, where they have led to lack of transparency about the projects themselves, and where they have led to a degradation of some of the social, labor, and environmental standards that have been built up over the years. So I offer that just in the spirit of candor so that we can get it all out on the table.
Good, I appreciate that. So the counter argument, because I actually went down to the Piraeus port and in my coverage for CNN to look at an example of Chinese investment into a port that was really in awful shape, as you would probably see. And this was an unusual structure because 50% remained with the state and the other 50% remained with COSCO. Investment from 300 million euros originally growing to 1.5 billion euros over a span of 4 years, employing 1,500 Greeks and having 5 senior Chinese managers into the port. And the trade has gone up 7-fold in a span of less than a decade since they had the initial conversations. So the Greeks would look at this as a win-win, and I think that's what the Italians were looking at. If they can do what they did in Greece to Trieste or Genoa, all the better. So there's two sides to this coin. You'd agree, right?
I would agree completely, John. And I think it's a mistake to paint with a broad brush. It's not 100% good. It's not 100% bad. My point is simply that we need to be mindful of the concerns that people are raising. There is the example of Piraeus. There's also the example of Haifa. Haifa is a port that the United States Navy goes to when it has problems with its ships in the Mediterranean. There are a lot of ports in the Mediterranean to invest in. Haifa's investment is a cause for question.
Very interesting. Okay. I know this was an issue because I just came back, as I mentioned, from Pakistan in the last 4 weeks. I had a fantastic visit, and it was really refreshing to hear from Prime Minister Khan and the entire cabinet singing the praises of the need to stick on to development and not get trapped into the confrontation with India. And I think everybody in the West was very pleased to see Prime Minister Khan taking that view. But the chief of staffs for the military, the foreign affairs minister, which I did an interview with on stage, the finance minister I did an interview with for CNN, and the prime minister stuck to the script entirely. This is an important window on the Belt and Road and the China-Pakistan economic corridor. How do you leave the fears that Ryan raised that were still prevalent in Pakistan during my visit, would you suggest?
Thank you, John. So there's a couple of angles to this particular question that you asked, but I think important thing is what angle do we look at it from?
Mm-hmm.
A country that has gone through a war on terror against mostly an invisible enemy. We come into power 8 months ago and we're scrambling. We have a mountain of debts accumulated by our own government, and I'm not talking about the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor or BRI, just the ground reality of Pakistan. You have a 70% youth bulge that has no jobs. That's 160 million young, angry people. And then you don't have any poverty alleviation plan which has any sustained thinking. Then you have, we're 12 on the list of World Bank's indicators for World Bank's countries for climate vulnerability. Now you add all of that with a country that has power outages for more than 72 hours, that has a water issue, and an chronic energy deficit. And then you have the CPEC, which is China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the part of the BRI that deals with us. and you see opportunity. And you see a new government that is talking to its Chinese counterparts. We also have really good FTA with China, of which we're in the second negotiating phase. The problem in Pakistan was more about a lot of traders being unhappy with the way the FTA has rolled out, and hence the prearranged, as we say, inbuilt agenda to review the FTA. The problem is not at all with the CPEC, because out of the entire CPEC amount which has been invested or to be invested, which is $62 billion US, only 5.8 billion of that is on loan. The rest is all either IPP mode or in BOT mode. So for us, to be honest, that is not the biggest issue. We have other issues in Pakistan, as I said, homegrown issues from which we're cooperating with China. And why do we see the CPEC or the BRI in Pakistan as a huge success story for us? Number one, we're talking about things that nobody else talks about: vocational skills, training, jobs, industrial parks, special economic zones, women's inclusive economic growth. And the two parts of the country that have suffered the worst in the war against terror are Western Corridor on the border with Iran and with Afghanistan. We're developing the CPEC routes through there now, which were not there in the previous government for obvious reasons, because previously it was also only brick and mortar development. Now we're doing social development, poverty alleviation. We're looking at the models that they have used. China was the first country, the only country, which actually concluded its Millennium Development Goals where the rest of us failed, ahead of time. So for us, that's where our outlook and focus is. If there's any other question, happy to answer.
Okay, let me follow up on one in particular, and I want to circle back to the Gwadar port afterwards because it's so strategic at this stage. But let's delve into the conversations, because it's unusual for a government like China, which has that surplus, to be able to focus on the development you're talking about.
Yes.
So there's a different narrative than the one that Ryan said. There's a counter narrative, of course, on every story, and this is our challenge even in journalism. What did the Chinese say? Like, this is a vulnerable part of your country. Let's help you get out of this trap of terrorism linked to poverty?
So interesting. This debate came up sometime in August, September 2018 after the new government. It was a direct request by our government to the Chinese government that the first phase of the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor development, which was mostly infrastructure, is very useful for linking both the north and the south of Pakistan. But that's not enough. We're building roads all around the country. We have the historical Silk routes, but we have a deindustrialization happening in the country for the last 40 years. So it's very well to have, as the previous government's, Pakistani government's policy, to have all these brick and mortar constructions happening. But what are you going to do with it when you have, as I said, 160 million plus people that don't have jobs? So this was our narrative. And I think I need to laud the Chinese government for actually listening, because there were significant changes being made then. Currently, we're still negotiating. And now CPEC is open to the world. We're actually inviting joint ventures from the rest of the world to come and participate in Pakistan-China projects. And that is going to increase transparency. We've just talked to a couple of French and German companies that were frankly unhappy with us for not inviting joint ventures and investment before. So for us, the more transparency, the better it is. And which is why we struggle to showcase this to the world. There are different narratives. And if I can come back to Gawad.
Well, it's very interesting what you're saying. I'm not trying to interrupt you, but the fact that the Chinese opened the door and did the engagement, it kind of woke up the West to come and invest in Pakistan, is what you're saying.
Yes, we met the EU ambassador a couple of weeks ago, who was frankly unhappy with the way that we had shut out people to an investment. And as far Gwadar Port is concerned, to be honest, Gwadar Port was a political move of the government of Pakistan long before CPEC, simply because that particular part of the country for the last 72 years, it's not a politically correct term, but it used to be referred to as the Africa of Pakistan. We stole their resources, the rest of the country, and we never gave them anything in return. So Gwadar is key for the development, Gwadar Port, of that entire part of the country, which is the biggest chunk of the country and historically underrepresented.
Good. I have to come back to you on the idea of the investment from Saudi Arabia and the UAE into the port, strategically on the energy side, which has been fantastic. Wing Ping He, I think it's great because you talked about the bricks and mortars, Deputy Minister, and you're talking about the need for connectivity, because if you don't have connectivity between Asia and the Middle East, then bricks and mortars don't matter. Do you want to pick up on the thought why it is on the 5G level in particular that China can help on the Belt and Road?
Thank you for having me to join this very wonderful conference. Actually, before I come to the 5G, I think one thing I feel very impressed, that is like 2 years ago or 1 year ago, whenever I go to join some conference talk about this BRI, I need to spend some time to introduce what it is. But now seems not necessary. Everybody knows what is the BRI before it even have other names called OBOR,
Yes.
and like what else? Yeah, there are many, many names. Now people understand what is BRI. This is a kind of improvement, which is, even though this thing is very new, only I think it's less than 6 years old, but now, as our ambassador just mentioned, has shined with as many as 124 countries, Italy becoming the newest one when the President Xi Jinping made a trip to Europe, so which is a very fantastic thing. So anyway, now back to this 5G, because yesterday I joined that session talking about the 5G, and even this early morning I watched some video talking about what is fantastic things in the future when this 5G era comes, which means when some sick the children or kids in Africa, some remote area, and then the doctor sitting in Beijing or the New Delhi and then the Paris and like London can give direct operation surgery immediately, yeah, because the time is so fast. And even when you are trying to go to your bathroom, and then your toilet knows you are a man or woman, immediately you get up, different levels of those toilets. So that's the 5G, even 5 minutes later, and then you
I'm not sure if I really like that.
Oh, even 5 minutes later, saying your mobile will get all those numbers about your urine, your health situation.
Yes.
So that's the future. That's the future. But if you want to make this future becoming reality, I think you should move step by step. So what is the first step? I think it's infrastructure. Can you imagine if I cannot travel to the beautiful city, the Dead Sea here? If I need to take 3 days come here, sorry, I will say no. I cannot join because it's time consuming. So it's not that easier, convenient. So that's exactly the thing the One Belt, One Road, this BRI now is focusing on this infrastructure building, connectivity. This is the first connectivity. That's why we have building a lot of ports, like you mentioned. I will come back to your ports issue later. So ports like roads, railway, we're talking about when we go to Africa, we're talking about 3, this kind of connectivity in the infrastructure area. One is the road, another is the train, another is aviation linking those different African countries. Because now the situation is very poor, honestly speaking. So you cannot build on any, like industrialization or even increase the intra-trade among African countries. Those are the topics every year. The AU Summit has been focused on intra-trade, and economic integration. But without infrastructure, how could you? You will repeat this topic every year, go on and on. So I think this connectivity, I think that's why the world now embrace this idea, because now China is saying, we would like to make contribution. We are not holding the flag saying China first. Or, all right, if China first, no need give all those money, go to other countries. Yeah, just for ourselves, that's enough. And then we just maybe get other countries' things to China rather than get our things to other countries. So because, of course, win-win. China is not saying we just give a check. Any country come to get the check, and then you take it away. Of course, China's company now, from this One Belt, One Road, and then they also go to other countries to build those ports, those railway, all those things. So this win-win. I think now that we also mentioned the second Belt and Road Summit in Beijing very soon coming on. What's the difference? According to my observation, now it's a second phase for this Belt and Road BRI, because now it's going to open more to outside world. For example, 2 days before I travel here, I joined a meeting with a Pakistan lady. She used to be the Deputy Secretary General of the UN. Now she has been invited as the member of the International Advisory Committee for this Belt Road Summit. This is the first time I heard. Before we didn't have this kind of International Advisory Committee for Belt Road Summit. Now it's open. We invited a lot. Yeah, those very high level, those, the wisdom people come to offer their suggestion, their observation for this BRI. Another thing is now we are talking about how to cooperate in the third market. That's exactly like Qatar port, this China-Pakistan corridor. So we have witnessed like Malaysia also go to do investment in Qatar, and also Saudi, yeah, you know, the rich country from Middle East, and also made a big this
You're
contract.
starting to sound like Donald
Yeah.
Trump. They have the money. The
Yeah, Donald
Saudis is
Trump
making
should follow, yes, with his money. Not only buy those McDonald's for those guys in the football team, right?
Right.
in the White House.
Okay, I'm going to stop you because you're getting through all your
Oh,
points.
yeah.
You promised you wouldn't.
I still have a lot of
I
points
know.
here.
Go,
All
hold
right.
on.
All
We've
right,
got 30
waiting for your
minutes.
call.
As Hildy Schwab will tell you, I'll make sure your issues are covered. I've been doing it for a while.
Right.
I want to follow up on a key point, though. Isn't it the reality, though, Wenping, that China plays a very long game? It's not worried about the election cycles that America is faced with or the European election cycles. And the reality is that the Belt and Road Initiative plays perfectly into a 100-year game that China's playing and not a 4-year election cycle in the United States. Isn't that the political reality?
Oh, I don't think that way. You know, our
I know
life.
you don't think that way, but a lot of people do think that way.
Oh, it's not that long vision, 100 years later. You know, our life expectancy is just 70 years, something like that. Anyway, but I think, like our friends just mentioned, some those different narrative about BRI, that's very natural, very natural. Nothing in the world is perfect. You see, especially this BRI, this idea just been there for 5 years more. So of course, all the way when it go abroad to do those projects, and then some may be facing a lot of challenge, risky. And the Chinese enterprises also takes time to learn how to abide by the local environment, local law. So a lot of challenge, even at home, like me come from the think tank. Before the very first year, lots of think tank just to want to figure out what is the meaningful things for this BRI. But now they also enter into the second phase, that is trying to make a case-to-case study to explore what kind of challenge for this BRI. Because this is also thanks for the think tank coming from US, from European countries, because you remind us, yeah, all those things, like why you pick up the strategic port rather than others. And actually there are many ports construction, not only those ports you just named out, like Qatar, like Djibouti, here and there, many.
But Wenping, you would agree with Ryan's point, and Ryan, please jump in. I'd love to have the Deputy Minister as well.
Yeah.
You would agree that those aren't done only for business reasons then? If a port is at
think-
overcapacity, you're deciding to invest, it does raise a legitimate question that Ryan's bringing up. Why is China doing it then?
I think, according to my observation, because I'm not coming from this official level, but I think because BRI has been written into our ruling party, Communist Party's this charter, you know, ever since 19th Party's Congress, it has been written in. So it has been served as a guiding principle, guiding strategy for China's like integration with the whole of the world. So maybe from that perspective, you can see this BRI is a long-term vision. Yeah, if from some perspective.
So you do agree with me? There is a 100-year plan.
This is just
I think so.
one indicator, one indicator. If things written in some things on the paper, doesn't mean it's real. Doesn't mean it's becoming the real.
I think so too. Brian, let's get Ryan into the debate and then we'll bring it to the other panelists. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, thank you for your comments, Wenping. I think they were great. I guess my thought on this is I agree that the Belt and Road Initiative is not going anywhere. It's written into the Chinese Communist Party's constitution. It's embedded in the legacy of Xi Jinping. As long as President Xi is in power, the Belt and Road Initiative is going to drive forward. Full stop. That's my expectation. However, I do think that the Belt and Road Initiative is going to need to change. It's going to need to become more responsive, and it's also going to need to become more selective. The currency of global...
All right, just curious, selective in which way, Ryan? Sorry.
Well, I was going to say the currency of global construction industry is dollars. China is moving towards a current account deficit. China's economy is slowing. It isn't going to be able to splash money around indiscriminately to projects around the world in the way that it has for the first 6 years. So I think that there will be a learning process, and I think that they will become more selective about what projects they choose. I think it also will need to be more responsive to the requests of recipients. Many of the recipients that we hear from in the United States talk about their desire for Belt and Road Initiative projects to be more green, more environmentally sound, more sustainable economically, and also more transparent. And I don't think that this is an area of disagreement between me and my Chinese friends, and I expect that when the Belt and Road Initiative Summit occurs later this month, that those will be themes that President Xi lays out. I would be prepared to support and encourage that. From my perspective, since this initiative is not going to go anywhere, it's going to happen. I would like for it to happen well. I think that infrastructure is a public good. If it's done well, it can provide benefit to all. And I hope that through these conversations and the feedback that our Chinese friends hear from people around the world, the initiative will continue to improve.
Okay. There was an effort, and it didn't gather any traction. I'd love to hear the Deputy Minister's thought on this, to use the Indian Ocean with the U.S. working with India to counterbalance the Belt and Road. First, your thoughts, Ryan, and then I'll ask the Deputy Minister. Is that really necessary after this has been written and there's 124 countries signed up to have a counter strategy to the Belt and Road?
Well, I don't think that it necessarily needs to be an oppositional approach. As I said, I think that infrastructure can be a public good when it's done well. My hope is that, as this conversation has already highlighted, that there will be a little more clarity on the intentionality of these projects. As there's more clarity on the purpose and objectives of these projects, I think that it will allay some of the concerns. In the absence of clarity, we're going to be left having worst-case assumptions about the expectations and objectives of the other, which is going to drive this rivalrous dynamic that has existed for the past 6 years.
Okay, very good. There was a peace pipeline, for example, Deputy Minister, that was going to link up Iran through Pakistan to India for natural gas. It's an initiative the United States blocked, right? Can we see the Belt and Road Initiative, with China's presence now in South Asia and stretching to the Middle East, unlock some of these opportunities for Pakistan, do you think?
Thank you, John. A couple of times in the discussion and in your question now, the word India comes up. Now, because of the Kashmir human rights situation, Pakistan and India have been through enormous difficulties with each other for the last 72 years now, 72 years in August. So as to whether, and I agree with Ryan, whether there should be any counter or whether that even makes sense, I honestly don't know. The question's out there. But as to unlocking future potential, I don't think any country, in particular Pakistan, and perhaps I'm going to echo President Trump here, usually don't do that, but Pakistan first. Where CPEC is concerned, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, it's Pakistan first. Our interests are entirely Pakistan-based, entirely strategic. We have a very long way to go. And China and Pakistan perhaps enjoy a unique position in the BRI as well, because we've been friends and allies for a very long time. So CPEC, at least in the BRI, in Pakistan's perspective, cannot be seen as leveraging anything other than what we already have. We're building upon what we have. We're further strengthening our historical friendship, which has withstood pretty much all the tests of time.
Good.
So
Let me follow up quickly, if I may. Sorry, as I want to cover a few other the issues here.
Sure.
Does Pakistan feel more secure with the backing of China then? Does it help?
In what sense?
Well, you know, the United States has not hidden its fact that President Trump and Prime Minister Modi have built up a relationship. Yes. Does it help to have China covering your back at this stage and being so committed to the country?
I think we've always had China at our back. And where it comes to the India narrative or the India issue, I think with the latest Pulwama incident that you mentioned, I think the world has seen for the first time. Interestingly, and I can say this, before Pulwama happened, we were all a little bit nervous because in Pakistan, we don't win elections on an India narrative. It really doesn't matter. But in India, it's the opposite. They win or lose elections largely based on how they portray their relationship, their power struggle with Pakistan. So to come back to today and what has happened, for us, largely, China's always there. It really doesn't matter that China, what I'm trying to say is that the CPEC is simply another addition in the layer of connections that we have with China, the friendship, the FTA, the CPEC, and more going forward now. We're inviting China and other developed countries and developing countries to look at us as a test case where international investment, whether it's Gavadir, whether it's the roads, whether it's on our education or in our skills development, we want to showcase to the world that this is a win-win scenario. I don't say necessarily this would be true for other countries, but I think if each country keep their own best interest at heart first, you'll not find China an unreasonable negotiator or an unreasonable partner. But it depends on how well you do your own homework.
Well, that's a fair comment here. Ambassador, a question for you here. I was in Kenya 2 years ago, I think is correct. Yes, 2 years ago, prior to the elections there. And the #1 issue was the investment by China into Kenya and the Mombasa port, the railway set up from Mombasa going to the capital of Nairobi, the dry ports that I saw going to the Masai Mara or Lake Nakuru, the roadways and the railways that were being built. I would think that would be a net positive. But there was huge concerns about the debt that Kenya was taking on, for example. And in the example of Pakistan, should China be more sensitive then if this, to keep this out of the political sphere, if this is a development project or not?
Thank you. Actually, I was been there in Kenya 2 years ago. عفوا في الحقيقة قبل
2 years ago, I went to Kenya, and I have witnessed in my own eyes 2 new railways. One for the internal regions in Kenya, and another one from Mombasa to Ethiopia to Djibouti. These 2 railways have created a good representation for the BRI for the first time in Africa. Because in Eastern Africa, for the first time, we witnessed the creation of a modern railway. I have witnessed with my own eyes a great welcome by the Kenyans, and I believe this is in relation to the funding sources. In this sense, China early on has negotiated with the concerned countries on funding and how to increase productivity and how to increase the financial power of the concerned country in order to evade the debt trap. Indeed, as regards BRI, I believe there is a slight misunderstanding and some critics on the Chinese real intent and what are the negative results of such an initiative and how we can circumvent that, especially in a geopolitical sphere. Therefore, we hear the voices of the developing countries, signatories to BRI, as being really applauding the BRI. As for the debt trap, China, through the negotiation with the specific countries, is trying to find out mechanisms to avoid the debt trap. To date, no single signatory country at the BRI has complained from falling into the trap of debt. Since the creation of the BRI, we have said that this is an initiative that aims at supporting the economic prosperity within a country. It does not aim at expanding the political and geographical authority of China and the world. And this is in line with the demands and aspirations of the concerned countries. It is not strange that some difficulties and some hindrances might hamper the BRI. We already know that, but thanks to a common vision, common principles, we are able to circumvent all that. Within the Chinese philosophy, if you go alone, you go fast, but if you go together, you go far away. This is the philosophy of China, a philosophy that is not imposed on others, and this is also the philosophy of Confucius. So we hope that through the BRI, we will be able to present to the world an effective way and a concept to build a more beautiful world. And this is the pathway that will pave the way for a world that everybody aspires to. Thank you.
With your comments, so I appreciate that. Let me follow up, and I'd ask you for a quick reply because I want to get Brian back into the debate. If that's the case, why was it such a horrendous challenge for President Uhuru Kenyatta to hold on to power? That's not how the Kenyan people saw it, as you know. It's a very sensitive issue in Kenya. It's a sensitive issue in Sri Lanka that Ryan brought up before. So let's deal with the realities. Obviously, people see you as the bull in the china shop, right? Coming in, lending money, but tying people up. So how do you counter that narrative, Ambassador?
Actually, in some Arabic countries and certain countries, there are different positions, different ideas about the background So about the impact of about BRI into their political affairs. But from China, with one side, we think من جانب نعتقد أن
On the one side, we in China will not meddle into the internal affairs of the other countries. This is our initial intent, and this concept was really greeted a long time ago by the developing countries. On the other side, the BRI initiative has nothing to do with the problems, hindrances, and internal complexities of the stakeholder countries. China always seeks to try to find common denominators. It does not try to sow the seeds of conflicts or to meddle into elections or to expand its political influence within the internal affairs of the countries. At the backdrop of this logic, if there are some concepts that are not in line with the spirit, with the core of the BRI, I believe this is not strange because every country has its own concepts and principles, but we are confident that as days go by, once the populations will witness firsthand their enhanced productivity, their better economy, they will also hail this BRI. And I believe this will further help in calming the situation, whatever the economic situation or social situation may be. Thank you.
I know there's sensitive ones. Ryan, you want to weigh in perhaps on Sri Lanka or why it became an issue in Kenya? Then I will open the floor for questions for the remainder. Thanks.
Sure. Well, on the question of debt trap diplomacy, is the Belt and Road Initiative a strategy to acquire, loan to own and to seize other countries' strategic assets? The Belt and Road Initiative, from my perspective, certainly is not aid. It's not assistance. It's not concessional. It's commercial. The Chinese are charging commercial rates for the loans that they're offering to many of the recipient countries. That's not a bad thing. I don't have a value judgment on it, but I think that we should call it what it is. But at the same time, I have to agree with the ambassador. I do not subscribe to the theory of debt trap diplomacy. I think that a colleague at Johns Hopkins University did an analysis of 3,000 Chinese projects that were funded by banks overseas, and they found one example that was debt trap diplomacy, and that's the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. So it's the exception that proves the rule. At the same time, I think we need to ask ourselves honestly, why is there so much traction for that narrative? And I think part of it has to do with the way that the Belt and Road Initiative takes place. Typically with development banks, when they come into a country, the World Bank or the Asia Development Bank, it's a technocratic bottom-up process where the projects are evaluated, they're assessed, they're over-assessed, they're assessed again, and then over time, they rise to the leadership for approval. The Belt and Road Initiative appears to be much more of a top-down process than a bottom-up process, whereas the leaders reach a understanding with each other, and then it is passed on to the technocrats to execute. And in the process of that, two externalities emerge. The first is the risk for corruption because there's this lack of transparency. And there have been documented cases of corruption that have occurred as a byproduct of these projects. The second is a perception of indifference to the concerns of civil society in these countries. And so these are real concerns that I hope the Chinese hear and can use to adapt and improve the initiative as it goes forward.
Great. We have time for some questions. We have some microphone, please. Do we have two microphones or one? Okay, let's get them. Is there a second question? Because we have a microphone here. I just want to make sure that we can address it. It's there, so please. Thank you.
Khaled Abuzar, CEO Eurabia. Ambassador, you mentioned that the BRI project is really an initiative for cooperation. The construction of the BRI has been mainly given to Chinese companies. When it comes to owning this infrastructure of supply chain, how will emerging countries that you go through bring added value to it? Will there be a space for them and really cooperation, or will it be because you own this infrastructure mainly for Chinese companies to benefit? Thank you.
Great question. We'll let the translation finish. That's for you, Ambassador.
And about the Chinese role in the infrastructure.
Let me see if I can clarify, but it's a very key question. everybody sees this as a kind of Trojan horse for Chinese construction companies. But in a host country, say if it's Jordan, if there's an infrastructure project, where's there room for the local companies to come into play? Is there space, or is this China Inc. spreading its wings?
That means if there's competition between Chinese companies and with local companies,
Do you bring in local companies?
not we bringing, but شكرا لهذا السؤال.
Thank you for this question. There are some concerns or questions on the expansion of these Chinese companies and their exclusive work in these countries, and will there be any competition between these Chinese companies and the local companies on the market? I believe this is a paramount question that has raised a lot of interest to the Chinese government, and as you do know, the Chinese government always encourages and calls for the Chinese companies to abide by the commercial and economic local bylaws and laws, and to respect the local commercial regulations. In that sense, the Chinese companies will seek to cooperate with local companies. The BRI initiative is not only for the benefit of the Chinese companies. It is an initiative launched by China, but to profit all countries. This is an initiative then launched by China, but to make it a participatory approach with China and all the other countries. We always try to find some practical positive results. For example, in Jordan, there are some Chinese companies and local companies working there. And some local companies are complaining because they do not have a strong competitive edge or ability. And to a certain extent, this is real, but I believe the creation of the large-scale projects must be in consultation between the Chinese companies and the local companies. In this framework, we always encourage joint ventures and the cooperation or bilateral cooperation at the managerial level or at the financial level or at the communication level between the government and the populations. This is our main objective, and as days go by, we are confident that the rate of local employment will increase. In Egypt, in the economic Suez zone, there is a great plant in order to produce fiberglass. Therefore, Egypt has become the second productive power in the world. The first one in producing fiberglass, rather, because of the cooperation with the Chinese. And therefore, thanks to this project, 3,000 new job opportunities were created for the populations. And only 101 managerial positions were created for the Chinese. So this is the main objective of the BRI, and this initiative will indeed provide new job opportunities, and this is our main objective, because there is a great rate of unemployment in the MENA region, unfortunately. Therefore, we are seeking to cooperate with our colleagues in the region in order to lessen this rate of unemployment. Thank you.
Before I take the next question, 1 second here. You're listening, obviously, to what the ambassador is saying. Is it possible, Shandana, to have actually legislation that says it should be a 50-50 joint venture or a majority-owned Pakistani joint venture? Is it reasonable to think on the Belt and Road that takes place in your country that the Pakistani companies have to be guaranteed a space, or is that not realistic?
John, we have Pakistan's investment policies come from the central or the Federal Board of Investment. We have provincial boards of investment as well. But long before CPEC came along, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, Pakistan was receiving no investment, despite being lauded by the CIA website and by the EU as one of the most open countries when it comes to rules of repatriation, rules of investment, ownership. We've all traditionally been open that way. Now, it would be a little bit funny if we sort of restricted that openness for China, and we'd better have a good reason for doing that, number one. I just wanted to also jump in and answer the gentleman's question and link it to what Ryan was saying earlier about the debt trap. It is true that certain countries have these concerns, and you say, let's accept those fears, those concerns, and the Sri Lankan port is being cited an example. Not wishing to defend China, but I have to quote with what I go through, right? What is my reality? And my reality is that we've created 75,000 jobs already because of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor in the most economically deprived areas in Pakistan. Another 600,000 jobs are planned and desperately needed jobs. Interestingly, where Gwadar Port is concerned,
Sorry, 600,000 jobs over what time frame? What time frame? That's fantastic.
the entire time frame of our the projects, yes. No, not collaboration, the projects. In Gwadar, for example, it's interesting that the Gwadar projects, all of them are grants, they're not loans. And those are some key projects for that, as I said, terror hit area. Where it comes to the port itself, it's mostly BOT. And it's not going to involve any sort of government concessions or loans. So I think I keep on bringing the debate back to Pakistan, that given that only $5.8 billion US from the entire $62 billion US is just loan financing from China. So it's important to look at alternatives. There are concerns, but there are also real life examples of how things have worked. And so perhaps, as you say, the fears are good. Fears are always a wake-up call to what could happen. But at the same time, the reality must be, side by side with concern.
That's great. It's refreshing. We had a question from the back, if I may.
Yes. Hadi Fathallah, Namea Group, and also Global Shaper from the Beirut Hub. There's discussion in Lebanon now that China will be coming in to save Lebanon because we're already heavily indebted. And my question to Mr. Haas is give the politicians a reason who have failed in the country and are already heavily indebted. Why not to accept Chinese money? Why would they not? And for the Chinese panelists, obviously part of this China coming into Lebanon, Tripoli port, free zone, or a free zone on the border with Syria, is to be involved in the reconstruction in Syria. What is China's strategy in Syria, and is it ready to enter Middle East conflicts? Thank you.
Great. Two very good questions. Go ahead, Ryan.
Well, thank you for the question. I just want to be clear. I'm not counseling any country to refuse the Belt and Road Initiative. All I am trying to suggest is that we should have eyes wide open about what it is and what it isn't. And you raise a good point. If Lebanon should have a choice. They should be able to have a series of options that they can choose from and not have one option that they feel compelled to have to take. I guess what I would suggest if a Lebanese official were to ask me is to be very clear about what the terms are, where the risk is. One of the problems that we've seen with many of these projects is that all the risk is placed on the recipients. Very little of it is owned by China. And that's an issue not for me to resolve. That's an issue between the recipient and the lender. But it's something that we should be mindful of. And if I could just make one final point before I turn back. I'm not trying to denigrate the Belt and Road Initiative. I think I've tried to be very constructive
you've been very
in offering suggestions of ways that it can be improved. One final thought that I would offer is I think that a degree of restraint by the Chinese would be helpful. It's great that fiberglass companies are being built. It's great that jobs are being created in Pakistan. Let's focus on that and maybe take a break on strategic ports for a little while. And while we're at it, it may be helpful to maybe dial back some of the rhetoric about China pursuing development, not domination, because it is casting the initiative in a very adversarial, confrontational tone with the United States, which is creating a feedback cycle in the United States towards the initiative that I don't think serves anyone's interest well.
Okay, very good. Before I bring in Wenping again, Shandan, I wanted to ask you that question, particularly with Ryan's comments about how it's being perceived in the United States. President Trump just over a month ago said, what's Pakistan done for us, and wants to cut aid. Then you have a partner like China, it's like, we can't do enough for you. Doesn't it make it easy for you to seek the strategic support of China if the United States is taking this attitude?
No, I wouldn't tie those two in together, because President Trump's question was answered by my Prime Minister Imran Khan on Twitter of all the fora. He said,
the great diplomatic platform.
Yes, he said, we've sacrificed 70,000 Pakistani lives against the war on terror, which was not of our making. We were unintended recipients of a different kind of aid, the ugliest aid possible. and it's funny, where I come from, the north of the country, there's many people that don't even know what an America is or the United States is, but they do know one of the areas in my constituency. I was fairly, I've never been so disgusted by my own lack of problems as I was then. 3 out of 10 women were widows in that particular area, and we paid a very heavy price. So I think that question is perhaps somebody misguided him to ask the wrong question of Pakistan, and it has nothing to do with China. What China and Pakistan are doing, and it would be wrong of me to also paint China as sort of, you say, a lender of the last resort. This question was asked earlier as well, and this has happened so many times in developing countries that often lenders come in of different sorts. We have development, let's say donor projects, but money always goes back to the country that it came from, and this consultants come in. So let's look at it as a large, if that's what they want to look at it, that why is it that only China seems to benefit from it? It's not. We're a living example. Of course, Chinese investment is coming in, of course, but Chinese have already been in Pakistan for a very long time. I don't know if you recall that there was a one-child policy at one time in China. And I have a lot of Chinese Pakistani friends who speak the language better than I do, who are as Pakistani, more loyal than I am. So our history shows us different side of China. So if people are worried, this is a great forum. Ask the right questions and you'll get the answers. But when it comes to, come back to your question, no, I don't think that question was a correct one to ask to begin with.
Okay, very good. Wenping, I wanted to get your thoughts on, and we don't have much time, but on Huawei. It's so interesting, the narrative around Huawei, which is a leader, and then I thought the interview with the BBC by the chairman of Huawei was incredibly bold, suggesting even if the United States and Europe gets paranoid, we will prevail. It's a technology game, not a spy game. How do we lift the cloud over Huawei and the debate that we see internationally now when it comes to connectivity?
Yeah, I'm also impressed by the CEO of the Huawei, his interview with the BBC. I think, if you follow the story of the Huawei, the engagement with the so-called spy, the story, you will see the attitude, the response attitude is changing. At the very beginning, they are very calm, this Huawei. They didn't make any, this voice out, even give Oliver, branch to the United States, saying we will continue engage with the United States company. Yeah, we will continue to listen in different voice. But later on, when those push getting too strong, and I think maybe push to the edge of the limitation they can tolerate. So that's why the Huawei come back, saying now, we will continue, we will prevail, and even getting more contract because this United States make a free advertisement for this company. All right, so everybody knows the Huawei. So I think this shows some kind of a very strong self-confidence about their own behavior. So when you go to when we talk about those neighbor division, division of the neighbor, global chain, and then we found the pyramid, and China is climbing up in a very hard way. Before, we are just manufacturing those very low value added, those products like clothes, like those suitcase, shoes, all of that. And then when you're climbing up to some very key and technical, those products like 5G technology, and then you are facing, this is not the glass ceiling anymore. That's the very strong obstacles trying to stop you for going forward. Of course, I appreciate Huawei's strategy, and I think now even the Huawei, the princess, now she's ready to even lawsuit to the United States government, even goes to the Canada. So anyway, this is abide for with the local law. I think the time may be on their side. I heard that Huawei has already teamed up with a very strong lawyer from the United States. Anyway,
when all else fails, get a good Wall Street lawyer, and it solves a lot of problems.
Yeah, there's a good business for them as well. They got a big case. May I have time to add something about?
In 30 seconds, because we're out of time.
Oh yeah, like this.
I know you've been writing a lot of notes over there, but you have to save
a lot of notes. Yeah, I don't have time to come back to answer those questions.
But give me a summary in 45 seconds.
Yeah, just one thing. I think this debt trap diplomacy. This has been becoming widespread. Actually, not only those recipient countries are very worried about that. I think the biggest worry should come from China's side, because the money is Chinese people's, taxpayers' money. So if all the way it's gone, disappeared, so the biggest worry should come from China's side. So that's why now the Chinese side also pay carefully those investigations about those projects. It's not that easy saying all the money easily coming from the China. So of course we need to the field trip visit and also all those investigations about project himself. Another thing is President Kenyatta from the Kenya himself has answered your colleagues' interview, CNN, about what their attitude about that issue. So according to his point is, as long as those money goes to a development project, it's not saying paying salary or buying those luxury things, well, he's not worried about that, like that Mombasa Railway. So this is a good trend, but only that one, of course, is not a guarantee enough yet. We need also to build on other things, infrastructure, I mean also industrial zone, get people jobs. They should have job. Otherwise, yeah, how this money come to pay the tickets for the train and how the money can come back from those tickets collected to repay the debt. So you need to make those productivity workable. So that's another thing. About this job, local job, yeah, how to, I think there
Wing Ping, you don't understand 45 seconds?
we need to, have another World Economic Forum to Beijing.
I have to make you conclude, but I appreciate all your notes as well.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to invite our audience. This is being live streamed out, but also it's going to be on the website because there's a lot of fantastic analysis here. One I will actually write a column about as well for the regional papers. So I appreciate all the contributions. I think we got to most everything you wanted to do, but Wing Ping in particular. But a nice round of applause for everybody. Ambassador, Deputy Minister Ryan, and Wing Ping. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thanks.